All right, guys, welcome back to the Baseball Recruiting Deep Dive podcast by Elite Sports Advising. This is episode 2. Today, we're joined by Matt Riebesell, D3 coach at Franklin and Marshall. He's the hitting coach and recruiting coordinator. He's been there since 2023. Before that, he spent 2 years at Roanoke College as an assistant. Before that, he was an assistant at FDU. He's coached in the Myrtle Beach Collegiate League and the Coastal Plains League. Played at Muhlenberg College in 2019 as a 4-year starter, was an all-region, all-conference player. Matt, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, really pumped to be here. Love going over this type of stuff, helping families out when we can. And I think it's really important that this type of information gets distributed, to as many ears as possible for families going through this process, because it can certainly be a difficult one to navigate at times.
Yeah. Yeah, no doubt. So, yeah, we obviously appreciate having you on. So just kind of talk us through, obviously, the Division 3 season ends a little bit earlier than the D1 season, so you guys have a little bit more time on the recruiting trail to get the ball rolling and everything. But yeah, since the season has ended, what have your weeks kind of looked like leading into the summer recruiting?
Definitely, yeah. Well, that's certainly one advantage. Especially for us. We're in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, but I live a little bit closer to the eastern side of PA, closer to Philly. So a lot of incredible high school programs that we get to go out and see. We try and highlight and target some of those high schools maybe that we've gotten some players from in the past. Or just that have a really, really strong reputation that we want to start to build those pipelines in and get out and seeing them play. This season for us ended a little bit earlier than we would have liked, but even in a normal year where we're making a playoff run, we still do have that opportunity to go out and see some state tournaments, or just, some big rivalry games, in the high school season, which, is, I think, more beneficial at times than this typical summer circuit, because, you see kids playing for a real championship that means something to them, a little bit more pride. So it's great to see that level of intensity out on the field in the time between, mid-May through where we are right now, just about to be June 1st.
Awesome. Matt, talk us through. I think where a lot of parents don't understand is just kind of when the recruiting cycle. Let's say, for example, like the 26 class right now, who this is their summer after their junior year. This is where recruiting really picks up for like the vast majority of players out there. When does your recruiting cycle really start for 26s? Has it, have you already been looking at those guys? Does it start this summer? And then what's the typical timeline from you get out to see them this summer to you like them, you're trying to get them committed?
Yeah, I think, when I think about that timeline, it's really like a November to November process. At least that's kind of how I internalize it. We pretty much wrap up with a class in middle of October. And I think that's, for a lot of high academic schools out there, pretty standard
Mhm.
across the board. We've got our admissions deadlines that are not as flexible as some might think, that we need to make sure that, we are wrapping up at least a majority of our class by, for us, it's pretty much early October. And then we'll take some time to kind of wrap up our fall season as a program with the guys on campus. And then, around right before Thanksgiving is when we start oftentimes getting those earlier recommendations from some of the more trusted recruiting advisors like you guys, and some of the others that we work with. Maybe a club program will start sending us some guys that they're excited about in their junior class that they think might be a strong fit. And we'll have conversations with those guys through the winter. Sometimes we're seeing video of them working out in the facilities that they work out in. We're obviously getting some more video during their high school seasons, until we can get out and go see them. And, right now is about the time of year where we're beginning to make those evaluations. For the guys that we really like, we probably have their academic information already, starting to see again if that fit is there and building. And then this next 2-3 month stretch, I would say from June 1st, we actually host a prospect camp on June 1st through, I would say mid-September is when we're doing 95% of our evaluations on players.
Sure.
And, the commitment timeline definitely starts towards the beginning of that as well. We will likely start offering players in the beginning of June, and that will go all the way up until we fill our class, which, in the past 2 cycles that I've been a part of here, typically is around, like I was saying before, that mid-September to late September timeframe, and that kind of wraps up your November to November cycle.
Yeah, yeah, that's a lot a lot to unpack there for you guys. So when you are I guess when you're going through that class and, right, that November to November cycle for, call it, the 2026s, how far in advance are you guys looking in terms of spots and who you really need in the class? Do you know going into that November, "Hey, we're gonna need 4 arms, 3 shortstops," or whatever the case may be, but do you guys have that mapped out pretty early, you would say?
For a program like ours, we've definitely got a rough estimate in that beginning of November. We're a program that sits around 34 to 38 players each year. That is, I would say, on the small to like small medium side of Division Three. At this level, there are no roster limits that you see, at the Division One level. So you do start to see some programs expand their rosters, 50, even 60 players at times. Maybe they play a JV schedule or have that type of situation. We don't. We feel like the experience that we can provide for that group of 34 to 38 in a given year is a really, really strong one, which is the main reason we keep it at that level. But, we're able to evaluate our fall season and say, okay, guys are panning out this way. Maybe there was an injury that happened the season before during the fall that's going to impact a position a player plays, or, even the player's ability to continue playing. And then that will, it won't change too much, but it might vary slightly after our spring season. And we see, okay, this is how it shaped out during, when we're playing for a championship. This is how we need to adjust. And like I said, those changes are usually a little bit smaller, but we've got a decent idea of what we're looking for. Yeah, I would say in the beginning of that timeline.
Awesome, Matt. Like, I think one of the biggest questions that a lot of parents are trying to get answered, and really at every level, at every different school, is just kind of, Matt, how has the portal and all these changes the last couple years impacted you guys? Like, are you seeing a lot? Are you seeing your best players? Are they leaving to go somewhere else? Are you able to retain a lot of those guys? Are you recruiting guys out of the portal? Like, how is Franklin and Marshall just dealing with that massive change overall?
Yeah. Well, I would say the higher academic side of Division Three is in a little bit of a different spot from what at least I'm seeing.
Sure.
Definitely don't want to speak for, other coaches or anything out there, but at least with us, we have been more we'll take a guy maybe one a year,
Yep.
rather than, either mass recruit out of it or, turn over our whole roster or even lose guys to it. I do think with a program like ours, with the academic reputation of a place like F&M and some of the other really strong schools in our conference, you're actually seeing players become really amazing. We had a NCAA Player of the Year candidate in our conference this year, a guy who was there all 4 years at Haverford College, who
Mhm.
that type of player is going to stay because of the experience that a lot of our schools provide our players and the degree that they're leaving with. That's obviously extremely valuable at a school like us, Johns Hopkins, Swarthmore, Haverford.
Yep.
So I would say on a large scale, we're not necessarily seeing players come into schools like ours and use it as like a new age junior college where they're staying
Yep.
for 2 years and looking for new opportunities. And I'm thankful that's the case. I mean, I can imagine that's an extremely difficult situation to have to work in and recruit in. One of my favorite parts about being a baseball coach is actually working hands on with the players and developing them. So losing that, I'm sure is tough. And then on the flip side, how we're using it to build a better program. We're a program that I say might because we've got 2 current guys on our roster, that we took from the transfer portal. Typically, they are coming from a Division One background with a high academic resume. So when we see a guy that we feel like can immediately help our roster, we're definitely going to explore that.
Sure.
To be honest, it's it's an accelerated process, but it's pretty standard to what our typical high school process is like. We don't just get to skip all the academic side of things, or we don't just skip the campus visit because it's a portal guy from a Division I school. There are plenty of those types of players who either don't find the right fit at their next stop, or come onto a Division III campus thinking that they're going to be the best player, and they're not. They fit in well, or they fit in better, but they're certainly not, a game changer. So we really want to make sure that we do our homework and make sure that it's a cultural fit. It's an academic fit. It's a fit that our program actually needs, and we're not just going to bring a guy in that we don't think that they can have an impact. Because clearly that's probably the reason they're in the portal in the first place, is because the experience on the field isn't what they thought it would be at their first stop. So, like out of 34 guys this past year, 2 of them were transfer portal players. They both played a significant amount of time for us. And it's always, if we see a guy that we think is going to be a potential fit out of the portal, we're always going to explore it. But that doesn't mean that we bring in more than one in a class. So yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, one of those guys was obviously Lorenzo, who we worked with through the process, and he, um exactly what you said. He wanted, as we worked with it, he wanted to go to a place where he was gonna get a great education, he was gonna get a chance to play, and obviously, he had just a little below 300 there this year, right?
Yeah, no,
Yeah,
he was one of the few guys in our program that started all 40 games for us.
yeah,
And he's a guy that, if you go and look at what he did at Richmond before coming to us, he had over 300 at
yeah,
Richmond. He was a solid Division I player. But because of the path that they were going, and because of the opportunities that he thought he could get at a program like ours, it all worked out. And no, Nick's he's been an incredible addition to our program. The guys love him, and I would say, in a perfect world, uh, all of our incoming transfers turn out to be some version of Nick Lorenzo, where they make an impact, they have a better experience, and they make the experience for the current guys on our team better because of how good of a teammate they are.
yeah. Yeah, that that makes a ton of sense. So back to the recruiting side of things, obviously, you're not going so heavy on the transfer, the in the transfer portal, I should say. So when you're evaluating the high school player now, how has that changed for you? Are you going after players that in the past you may have thought you didn't have a chance at recruiting? Or are you just kind of sticking to the script, and you guys kind of have the ideal type of guy that you're targeting, I guess?
No, that's a great question. I mean, we're hearing it from some of our coaching peers at the Division I level that they're essentially not recruiting high school players anymore. So it
Yeah.
it opens up
Yeah.
a much wider, variety of players for us to see. So I think naturally our gauges of what we look for have gotten slightly pickier. We're able to go after a player that, I mean, I played in the Centennial Conference. I don't think the same player that I played with or against is necessarily the ones that are stepping onto campuses as freshmen. Obviously, what that looks like to a family is kids that are throwing a little bit harder, that probably were Division I arms, 5+ years ago,
Yeah,
are, I don't wanna say being forced to a Division III roster, because at the end of the day, it's still an unbelievable
yeah,
experience to be able to
Mhm.
participate in, but that are making their way to a Division III roster. It's a guy who might have had really gaudy power numbers in high school, or that runs a 6'7", 6'8", that you're seeing as a regular fit, not like, "Oh, they got a kid because he fell
Yeah.
through the cracks." It becomes the new norm. So metrically, those are some of the things that obviously stand out, but it also, and something that I'm most excited about, is that it really allows us to, when we've got, let's say, a couple spots left, and we're deciding between 8 to 10 guys that we all think are talented enough to play on the roster, it really allows us to go say, okay, what kid is going to be the best fit? What kid is going to add to the team culture? What kid does the things, on the field, like shows extra hustle, is always there to pick their teammates up when they're not doing well, holds themselves. You wouldn't be able to tell what the score is based on their reactions on the field. It almost allows us to dive deeper into those topics. Um, than, we might have been able to in the past because the pick of the litter wasn't as, wide.
Matt, I mean, it's a great point, and I do think that, and this is something interesting we can talk about because I do think across the country, there's so many kids that it's like D1 or bust, and they just feel, well, if I'm not playing at like LSU or Clemson, it's like, yeah, I mean, me too, bud. Like that would be great to go play in a facility like that. Um, there is like a stigma, it seems, with like the lower levels, Division 2, Division 3, of like, it's and some kids will say things like to us as advisors, like, well, I could go D3 and I'd be the best player in the conference. And they just think it's like that much lower of level of play. Can you speak to just like how, and like you were talking about how now with the portal, like there's a lot of Division 1 schools that we talk to, like you said, that are like, we're high school guy. Like, why would I recruit a high school guy? Can you just speak to just how competitive it is, especially now more than ever at the Division 3 level?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of reasons for it. First off, you're obviously seeing the trickle down effect of like the lack of high school players being recruited means that players who probably would have made Division 1 rosters are coming down to this level, and as a whole, making the entire level better. But also the access that players now have to technology within their programs. Even like, I think the big thing is, oh well, Division 3 doesn't have as much time with their coaches, so clearly it's not as competitive as a level. I think that can kind of be thrown out the window at this point.
Yep.
Although we're not allowed to be physically present with guys as much as Division 1 and Division 2 programs, the amount of access that players at this level have to, you know, their personal hitting coaches from home, the equipment that they're still able to go to the facility and use, the facilities that Division 3 programs have. I mean, there are many Division 3 programs at this point that have better facilities than some of the mid-major competitors that they might be recruiting against. We're lucky to be in that boat. I think because of that, you're certainly seeing it in terms of the talent level. I We started doing it a couple of years ago, and we did it again this year, where we started inviting some juniors out to come see a conference doubleheader of ours. And I think what they realized was, we're fortunate enough to play a lot of our home games in a pro park where they have the velo right up on the scoreboard. And
Yep.
when they're seeing our starter go out there and throw 90 to 92, and then relievers come in after him and throw, 86 plus basically the whole time, I think the kid who might think, "Oh, I'm," you know, just as an example, 80 to 82, but obviously by the time I step onto a college campus, my body will naturally mature, and I go to these pitching coaches and I'll be 89 to 91. Great. That's awesome. You developed. Now you're a Division 3 pitcher. Go have success there. It's that's like kind of the best way I can describe it. I mean, the how hard the ball comes off the bat for some of the top hitters at this level, it's it is equivalent to watching a major league batting practice at times. Obviously not top to bottom. The depth is what sets the levels apart. But I can confidently say there's at least one player on every team in our conference, which means it must be the same in other conferences, that can go be not just make the team at a Division 1 school, but be a regular contributor to Division 1 programs.
Yeah. Yeah, we see I mean, you're seeing it across college baseball now with, like, I don't know his name off the top of my head, but the kid from MIT that committed to Tennessee 2 weeks ago. Um, I have obviously coached at Boston College, and I followed that program closely, and I think it was 2 years ago, 3 of their most consistent arms were Roger Williams, 2 Roger Williams transfers, and a Babson transfer. So, yeah, it just goes to show it's all about the opportunity and getting a chance to play, and development a lot of the time is in your hands. It's how bad do you wanna get to, be the best version of yourself, I guess.
Yeah, and just to jump in real quick on that, I mean, that's something that we talk to our guys about at no matter again, it comes into play more with us because there is a lack of exposure to the coaching staff during the off season, the fall. Again, once the spring hits, it's pretty much the same that you would get across all three levels. But during the fall, that's where programs at this level really set themselves apart. And I think in the past, it used to be, okay, if there's a 10 league or 10 team conference, 5 of the teams you can tell who locks up the shed at the end of the fall and doesn't touch anything until the spring, and the programs that don't. And now it's top to bottom. And again, I'm assuming that because I'm seeing it, having played in the conference from 2016 to 2019 and now having coached in it 23, 24, 25, that's a long enough stretch to say it's probably happening elsewhere. And if there's one thing to kind of backtrack that I can say about how our program, quote unquote, uses the portal, we have with COVID years, we were able to send some guys after they graduated from F&M to go play at, some places like Villanova, UDEL, Richmond, Northeastern. And it was really cool in, those scenarios to see those guys get to those programs and not just make the team, but be an all conference player at UDEL, be an ace of a staff at Richmond, be a closer at Villanova, impact players. And I anticipate that, although, again, because we don't have graduate programs, we're a 4-year college, if there is a situation that arises again where a player gets hurt, doesn't use a year of eligibility, that's honestly how we will kind of help guys play at that next level, is saying you can't play here anymore, unfortunately, but you do still have eligibility. We've kind of created a track record of having guys go on and play at the next level. So hopefully we can put some more kids in those spots too.
Yeah. Um, so with the just the recruiting differences, I guess, I think it's important for families we work with to know and understand. I think it's good to hear from you. Division 1 versus Division 3, what are the differences with, like, visits with the recruiting calendar? Obviously, we're in a dead period here for Division 1, but you guys can go out and be active. So just talk through some of the major differences that, are important, between you guys.
Yeah, again, it's really a matter of like the rules, I would say, and how much communication we're able to have. It's I find it refreshing, at least, to not necessarily have to worry about when I'm picking up the phone to shoot a text message to a guy or,
Yeah.
ask how their last start or last game went for high school. Um, you know, I, when I was on the Division 1 side of that, it was more, it was during COVID. The landscape has even changed so much since then. But, having these last 5 years or so back at the Division 3 level to be, one of the primary recruiters in both programs that I've been a part of, um, I can tell you that the coaches for the most part are as active as ever, in terms of Division 3 schools. I think utilizing some of the dead periods, some of the quiet periods as times to get off campus more, maybe see a kid before, a Division 1 who they might potentially be recruiting against, in the next couple of months or something along those lines. So, it's although Division 3, I would say, typically has a slower process than the Division 1 because of that natural, like, trickle down effect. Obviously, the Division 1s are gonna kind of go out there first, and once they identify a kid, you're starting to see some Division 1 programs already racking up the number of commitments they have, whereas Division 3s, for the most part, are, still at the lower end of that scale or not having any yet. Um, it's really just part of it is like wait and see what happens, but then the other part is, oh, the kid who a Division 1 program might have been able to, like, get on late, we can kind of go make a good impression early with that player, um, because we're able to communicate and, have guys on campus. But in terms of, like, what it actually looks like, from the emails that I send are not different. I don't use different wording. I'm still trying to go after the best players I can find. The campus visits still look the same. They still have, a meeting with myself and the head coach, and, taking a tour of campus, and hopefully getting to meet a couple of our players. I would say the day to day doesn't change much at all.
Matt, this is something I ask all of all the hitting guys that come on here. Obviously, like, all of us as hitting guys have certain things we like to look at, maybe like one or two metrics that we think are the most important. And then just like the eye test, when you go watch a kid play, man, that swing looks good. What are some of the key attributes that you look for in a hitter And then whether it's in their swing, their mentality, like what are those attributes for you?
Yeah. I don't think that I'll provide an answer that's necessarily groundbreaking. I feel like I've just kind of been lucky. I know I've been lucky enough to work alongside and under some really amazing hitting coaches, and be around them to kind of see what works and pick their brain. So, for me, a quick bat is like the number one thing that's going to stand out at a camp. I think if there's one thing that I write down about the most hitters, it's fast batter, like ball jumps off the bat. Those two things will play, I think. Um, my big thing is how can a player get to second base on their own? Are they a high on base guy that can cause chaos and, steal or, create some havoc that will end up getting them to second base on their own? Are they a guy that can go first to third? Or are they a power guy that can slug themselves into scoring position? Those I would say as an offensive player, that's definitely the thing that I would wanna see most if I were to go watch a player play live. Because at this level, I think there are a lot of good hitters in high school who are singles hitters that don't have the speed
Sure.
to be an impact player, and it's really difficult at this level to string 3 hits together in an inning. So we gotta manufacture, and I think if we can find a guy who is part of a system in their high school or club where, they're just running the bases at a great rate, or they're obviously able to hit the ball in the gap or over an outfielder, that's probably going to translate at our level as well.
Yeah. Yeah, and how much are you how much are you kinda diving into that with the players that you are recruiting through the high school process, letting them know what you may need to see improve, what you really like? How much are you really getting into that, or is that more when they get to campus, you just work, kinda through it on the development side?
Yeah, that's I would say kind of both. I can kind of get into how we talk about it with them through the recruiting process, but then also once they're on campus, I think the most important thing to lay out is my philosophy. And again, now working under Coach Horning here at F&M, whether it's a hitter or a pitcher, a big cornerstone of our approach is we recruited you to come here because we liked what we saw and we think you're a good player. We're not necessarily going to bring any guy in and then strip them down and say, no, 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 no. We like some of your tools, but this is how an F&M hitter or pitcher does it.
Right.
I think that's more often the case than not. But in the recruiting side of things, yeah, it's, if we go see a kid play, whether it's just random discovery. We're at, Diamond Nation Field 4 and we see a kid that we've never heard of before that we really like, or whether it's a guy that we get sent out to go see, and they don't do something that we think they can. It might be a conversation of, "Hey, really liked how you played, but next time I really wanna see how you run the bases," or, "I saw there was a runner in front of you every single time you got on." Or sometimes it's a matter of going to see a guy and they walk in all 3 of their at bats. Just letting them know like, "Hey, you did the best you could that day. I'm glad you didn't try to chase pitches just because you knew a coach was gonna be there. But we're gonna come see you again and, we're gonna wanna see how you handle the bat." Um, then when they get on campus, chances are no coach, even at the Division I level, is getting a player who is the most perfect fit into their current offense or current pitching rotation. There's going to be some tweaks that need to be made. It's not a total overhaul, but there are some tweaks that whether it's to make them more of like the offensive system that we run or just something that we see during the recruiting process that we see and say, "Hey, you stand out a lot." And this is probably a conversation that we would have on their visit of saying, "Hey, you stood out a lot. We really like the way you play. I think you could even make more of an impact once we get you on campus and work with XYZ, whether it's plate discipline or whatever it might be." But we will have those conversations throughout the process. And then once they get on campus, yeah, it's something that we do during our fall season is, especially with the hitters, making sure that we're working with them in small groups throughout the day, to have more of that, one-on-one or at least small group setting work with myself to, you know, try to get them as much development as possible during that time that we have with them in the fall.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that all that all makes sense. So, through the summer, just with your I guess, with your recruiting calendar, obviously, there's a ton of good academic events that you guys attend, like your show balls, your head first. You have the Ivy camps. I'm sure you go and check out some of those. But how do you guys kind of balance and prioritize those events versus, I guess, seeing kids play live a bunch as well? Because it's a lot for you guys. I feel like a lot to cover.
100%. Yeah, I would say our biggest meeting as a coaching staff, after our season wraps up is the layout of the upcoming summer ahead, and honestly, so recruiting is definitely one of my favorite parts of college coaching. I was a tour guide in college. I worked in the admissions office when I was in college. I think if I was not a coach, that's probably the route I would want to go, just because I enjoy hearing about, the different paths that lead families to a certain school. I was one who I never heard of the school that I went to before. I ended up, getting on campus for a visit at Muhlenberg. And it's why Coach Horning and I have actually started a club program called the Academic Prospects that prioritizes families that are looking for getting in front of coaches at a higher academic level, and taking them to tournaments that are most relevant to that. So, for us, it's a matter of, we're going to go to the head firsts every year. We're going to go to play to win. And another one that has emerged, Coach Raddick down at Richmond does an unbelievable job at his Richmond North to South camps. So we'll go to those year in and year out. Someone from our staff will be there. And then for the more like tournament style events, we're really looking at some of those events like the Carpenter Cup, Diamond Nation Super 17, and the Blue Chip that they run at the end of the summer. Prospect Select runs the Boston Open and then the Philly Invitational. And those aren't events that we're going to necessarily be watching one field all day long or have like multiple coaches just sitting on a field. Those are events we're more so going to say, okay, we've gotten recommendations from some club coaches, some advisors, some guys who have just cold emailed us and sent us video that we've liked before the summer started. We're going to go and prioritize seeing those guys at those tournaments. But again, we're choosing those based off of our proximity. Even though, FNM is an expensive school, that doesn't mean that all of the tuition dollars are going to the baseball recruiting budget. And that's the same at Ivy Leagues. It's the same at Patriot Leagues across the board. We need to really make sure that we're utilizing our resources as best as possible, and going to events that players who are likely to be interested in FNM are going to be at. So when it comes to choosing the events that we go to, we've got to, we're not flying coast to coast to go see one player that we like. We will go to the Arizona Fall Classic because they do have that academic portion of the day. We're not a program that goes to some of the bigger PG and PBR events down in Georgia and Florida, because at the end of the day, a lot of players who end up coming to FNM are not, we can see them elsewhere much closer where we don't have to get a hotel, get a plane ticket, and do all of those things. So, oftentimes, and again, kind of going back to why we started Academic Prospects, we got to the point where we were seeing kids later in the process, September or October of their senior year, going, "Hey, coach, like, I'm really interested in F&M." And we go, "Well, we haven't seen you. How is that the case?" We average between seeing 30 and 35,000 players every summer between all the events we go to. How have we not run into you? And it was, well, I was, at this event. I don't want to call out any of the organizations, but we were at events that basically academic coaches don't go to, which is tough because it's a different process than the typical recruiting process.
Matt, you bring up the academics and F&M's academics, and so I think it's a great time to just kind of talk and make sure that everyone listening and parents and players understand, like kind of what are the academic requirements for F&M, like GPA, test scores, APs that need to be taken. Do honors classes count towards it? Like what is, generally speaking, what does that look like at F&M to get in?
Yep. Well, I think the biggest thing for families to know is that we are test optional. I know not every school is, but I feel like more schools are certainly going that way more than not. I think what is going to set a student going through the application or the admissions process at a high academic school up more than anything else, one, the rigor of the schedule.
Yep.
Again, we know not every high school offers the APs or IBs or whatever it might be. They all kind of have their own title for classes now, but at the end of the day, our admissions department and all admissions departments know what classes are challenging versus not challenging. Obviously, student filling their schedule with electives and study halls is going to be a tougher sell for us to admissions rather than someone taking an elective that's an AP or a higher level course, the honors, those types of classes too. I would say I've seen more applications that admissions views favorably of kids who might not be the A to A plus student, but challenges themselves in the classroom rather than, the 3.9 of basic level or very easy elective classes throughout the high school, throughout their high school career. So test scores, there's not one magic number that you have to be above this. Even GPA, every state fluctuates so much on what scales they use and what they count and what they don't. So I would say the number grade 1 through 100 in challenging courses, if you can keep that high, you're going to have a really, strong application through the process.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. So when you say a kid commits, you feel really good about the transcript, baseball wise, obviously a great fit. How much are you guiding them through what classes they need to take next year, how their schedule needs to look? Because obviously they can't just totally settle and take the easiest courses to just finish out senior year. So how
Right,
much
so you're
do you
saying if a student commits to us as a rising senior and then what they
Yeah.
take that senior year?
Yep.
Yeah, so we actually, will go through this time of year and get that senior schedule, from them as we run our pre-reads and, so we go out, we like a player, they have interest in us after the or sometimes before, but at some point during the visit process, we will run an academic pre-read on a player, because again, we don't want to mislead a family. We don't want to get too far down the process and then say, "Oh, well, the coaches thought the application was good to go, but it doesn't look like that for whatever reason from an admission standpoint." So we try to get that done to make sure that we can always be as transparent and upfront with families sooner in the process. And during that, we'll collect that senior schedule from them and we'll kind of have the first look and we'll have a good idea, and obviously that changes here and there. Sometimes classes fill in the high school and it's a rougher estimate, knowing that they haven't solidified that senior schedule. But for example, if a student wants to come to F&M and study business, and we get that senior schedule and on the transcript there's no calc on there, it's going to be hard. And what we'll tell them is, hey, you can go through with this, but know that you're going to be expected to take a college level calculus class as soon as you step on campus. It's going to be difficult. You probably want to take it in high school just to give yourself a strong foundation. We've seen guys say, yeah, I'll do it. And they come and, do great in the class. And then we've seen that the other way where they don't take it. And some guys do great, some guys don't, depending on, how their brain works. And, but we will give, I will say, subtle feedback. We will give recommendations. But we're not, once a kid commits, sitting them down and going, okay, this is what you need to take class by class.
Matt, back to the recruiting side, and this is another question I'm asking pretty much every coach we talk to, because I think players really have to understand this. Is like, what are the few things you're out at a tournament and you're watching a player? Like, what are the things for you that you see them do this on the field, and it's like instant red flag? Now I'm really doubting if I want this guy or not.
Yeah. I would say for pitchers, like bad body language specifically towards an umpire. I think everybody going into the situation understands that like a lot of these tournaments, it's like either a time limit or
Yep.
whatever like umpires are clearly told, keep the game moving. I think most club coaches, at least the ones that I did back in the mid 2000 teens going through the process, were always like, hey, just go out, play your game, do your
Yep.
thing. You don't want a coach to walk away going, that player, what I remember about that player was him arguing calls, not like
Yep.
what happened on the field. So it stands out. The umpiring at our level is not MLB quality. It's not bad by any means, and there's, certainly more umpires who are like career umpires rather than just, showing up after their day at work to do a high school game.
Yeah.
But it shows us that you don't necessarily have the toughest mental stability to weather. You could be the last relief pitcher coming in on inning 18 of a doubleheader day when we play 2 nines. Like, do we want the guy who's able to lock in that moment and execute, or do we want the guy who's going to come in a big spot after spending 8 hours on a baseball field and let little things kind of rattle them? Positionally, it's again nothing groundbreaking, but always hustling on the base paths is a big one for us. We care a lot about base running, as you can probably tell at this
Mhm.
point. You know, it's not something as simple as like, oh, a red flag would be like striking out. Now, like slamming your
Sure.
helmet after you strike out is a red flag, but like it's more of like the non-performance. It's like, how are you going to act in the dugout? How are you going to act after a game on the bus that can get you crossed off from like an immediate like action. Obviously, if we come out and see 2 or 3 times and we don't see any redeeming qualities on the field, that's not going to bode well. But again, that's a multiple evaluation type of situation rather than like
Yep.
one thing that gets a kid crossed off.
Right. Yeah, I would say the last thing for me is how as you're recruiting a player, how much homework and digging and just background, I guess, are you doing on each player? How important is the family in the recruiting process? Like, obviously, mom and dad are you want them to feel invested in the program and be a part of it for 4 years as well. So, yeah, just kind of talk me through your process with that and how much of a factor I guess the whole family can affect the process.
Yeah, family is a huge part of it, as I think it should be. There's certainly more of a separation of, at least from what I was used to in high school ball and the college ball. But a lot of the programs at this level heavily depend on the support from families, whether it's like being there present or financial, whatever it might be. Like that's huge. Um, but yeah, they're definitely a big part of the process. We From like a visit standpoint, like their questions are just as important as a lot of the questions the players have at times. But at the same time, we definitely want to see a player who we get the sense is going to be independent, is going to be able to, you know, if we ask them a question about something going on, it's not, "Hold on, I need to talk to my parents before I answer this." It's,
Yeah. Yeah.
they can develop that relationship with us, and part of that is on us as coaches to provide them a really, welcoming atmosphere that, as soon as they step on campus, that they can feel like they're part of the group. And I think the reason we're able to have that is because of the upperclassmen as well. We know that if we're gonna be a successful program, our younger guys are going to need to be able to contribute, whether that's immediately on the field or just to be positive in the dugout until their number gets called. So our older guys do a fantastic job of making sure that happens. From the other side of it, yeah, we definitely want to make sure that the families are invested and engaged. To make sure that we can kind of run on all cylinders. From a homework perspective, we try to talk to as many high school coaches and club coaches as we can. Oftentimes, again, our first interaction from a player is coming from one of those club coaches or advisors who have a little bit of a deeper rooted connection with that family already. So we'll collect as much as we can. Um, there are times where it's our text messages and phone calls with the kid, the visit, and that's it. Um, Luckily, we've been fortunate enough where at least in my time here, it hasn't bit us. But we try to do as much as we can. These days, it's not always as easy, I would say.
100%. Matt, thanks for joining us today. Like that was awesome. I think it's been great just for again, we talked about like kind of there's a lot of kids out there who just don't know much about the Division 3 level and just how competitive it's always been, but definitely how competitive it is now with all these changes. Thanks for joining us, man. Anything else you want to say before we go?
No, if there's one thing that I can say, and I kind of thought about this in relation to another question, but one of those reasons that you mentioned of how competitive it is because of the physicality that we're seeing at this level. I at camps and events that I'm speaking at, I will always tell families if there's one thing that you can invest in as a younger high school player, it is the strength and conditioning side of this all. You can have the prettiest swing in the world, but if you can only hit a line drive to an infielder, it's going to be really hard to play at this level. Or you can have the best pitching mechanics in the world, if you're not hitting a certain threshold, it's going to be really hard for you to compete, whether it's this level, and obviously it only raises as you go up. So the more physical a guy can be, I guess that's one more thing that would really stand out about a player for myself, even if he doesn't have the prettiest swing or arm path or whatever it might be. But no, I really appreciate you having me on. I think these conversations are really important to reduce that number of players in the transfer portal, reduce the number of players that don't find what they seem to be is a good fit. That, like I said, this is one of my favorite parts about being a college coach. So, yeah, happy to lend a hand whenever I can.
Thanks, Matt.